Hey everyone, it's Marla here, and in this week's video, I'm going to show you what I came up with as part of a collaboration called Deck the Chairs. I'm part of a creative group, and a few weeks ago we were talking about making vignettes, and we were sharing pictures with one another. One of the members of the group shared this picture from Country Sampler Farmhouse Magazine, and we all fell in love with it. Another member, Kathy, who's from Waste Not Upcycle, thought it would be great if we all chose a chair and did something similar to this, so we decided that we would do a collaboration and call it Deck the Chairs. A couple of years ago, I attended a workshop put on by Debbie Beard, and she took us to Kobe's Flea Market in San Diego, California, and I was fortunate enough to pick up this beautiful chair for $5. I loved it just the way it was and knew the only thing I would have to do was to style it for the holidays. For project one, I took 3 wooden boxes that I had picked up in Wisconsin earlier in October, and I decided I wanted to paint them with milk paint. So I started by giving each of the boxes a good coat of DIY's liquid patina in Dark and Decrepit. I wanted the milk paint to crackle, and I was hoping that this dark color would show underneath. If you have not watched any of my videos before, thank you for joining me on this one. My name is Marla, and I am the owner and creator behind From Rust to Roses Vintage. And I try to put out a video every Tuesday. I want to apologize for my voice today. Several of my family members have been under the weather this past week, including myself, but for me it has mostly affected my throat and my voice. Once the liquid patina had time to dry, I mixed up some pink milk paint and gave the box 2 good coats. When I finished with the first box, I added a little bit of flour sack to my pink milk paint and used it to paint the second box. I then went back to the first box and gave it a coat of liquid patina so I could put an inlay on it. This is one of the beautiful inlays that came out with this year's IOD holiday release. Before I apply the transfer, or the inlay in this case, I always give it a good spray of water on the paint side. I know some people do the back, but it seems to work better for me if I spray the water directly on the paint. Just don't oversaturate it. Once I had it positioned the way I wanted it, I used my fingers to pat it down into the liquid patina. I went back, and if there was any place that looked a little dry, I added more liquid patina to those areas. And then I gave it a good misting of water, dabbing back the extra with a paper towel. It doesn't really bother me if I get some wrinkles in it. In fact, I just think it kind of adds to the vintage look, but certainly I'm not going for a lot of wrinkles. Just a few here and there. While that was drying, I went and chose a few more pieces from that inlay and put one on the lid for the first box. I repeated the same process for the second box as well as the third one, which you haven't seen at this point, but I just used different pieces of the same inlay onto all 3 boxes and their lids. When you're using a top coat to apply your inlays, you can't let it stay on there forever like you could if it were paint. Within 10 to 15 minutes, you need to spray the inlay with water, dab back the excess, and then peel it off. If you wait too long, there's a good possibility that the inlay will not come off at all because it is in top coat. The other thing about using top coat is the second and third applications are not as good as the first one. However, I was able to reuse some of these even though I had put them in top coat. Here I'm just applying the inlays that I had chosen for the lid of my second box, again using the same method as the first box. For the third box, I chose to paint it a very pale green. I wanted to keep my colors similar to the beautiful colors in my chair, which are kind of a minty green and several shades of pink. After all of the boxes were finished, I went back with my finger sander and began to distress them. I applied a good coat of Fusion's antiquing glaze to each of the boxes to give them that old vintage look. I used a soft towel to remove any excess and then even went in with a baby wipe to the center because that's where it would generally be the lightest and most of the aging around the edges. I continued this process with all three boxes. I absolutely love how they turned out. They look like boxes that my grandmother may have had, or even her mother. For project 2, I grabbed a book holder because I wanted to kind of go with the kitchen theme that we had seen in the picture, and so I knew I was going to put an old cookbook that I have on my chair. I started out by taking this outside and giving it a good coat of Rust-Oleum spray paint in the color Espresso. I then used a mixture of DIY White Swan and crinoline and painted that all over the espresso. I wanted to age it by wiping some of the paint back, and that is extremely easy to do when you use DIY clay paint. There was some sort of texture on this piece that I hadn't really noticed before, but it started showing up when I put on the white paint, and I really liked it. It gave it a much older look. Certainly didn't look like something that you would just go out and buy today. Once the paint had dried, I used a wet wipe and went along removing the paint from all the high points on the cookbook holder. You'll see in the final pictures how it makes it look very old and vintage. DIY paint is water activated, which makes it easy to wet distress, but that also means that you have to seal it. So once I was done with the distressing, I gave the whole piece a coat of liquid patina. I love how it turned out, and it was the perfect size to hold this beautiful old gold medal flower cookbook that my neighbor gave to me when I was very young and she was very, very old. I believe this was published sometime around 1900. If you're wondering if you heard a cat, you did. My cat Vincent came to visit me while I was working on my vignette. For project 3, I grabbed a rolling pin that I had sitting up near my work stand, gave it a coat of DIY Dark and Decrepit, and then used some of the leftover pink milk paint to paint it. I wasn't too careful about how I got the milk paint on there. I was actually just using it for the background for a decoupage paper I wanted to put on, and I don't like to waste anything, so the milk paint worked perfectly. This paper is the row of houses that everybody seems to love, myself included. And instead of using the houses from Partridge Lane, I thought I would decoupage this paper onto the rolling pin. I'm using the wet tear method so that my edges are more organic and not straight. I had to tear the paper a couple of times to get it to fit onto the rolling pin exactly. Once I had it down to the right size, I used DIY liquid patina to decoupage the paper onto the rolling pin. I find it helps if you spray the back of your decoupage paper with water before you put it on. It will loosen up some of the fibers and make it a little bit easier to get on there without any wrinkles. Once the paper was in place, I gave the entire rolling pin a good coat of DIY liquid patina, not only to seal the paper, but to keep all of those frayed edges down. After the liquid patina dried, I gave the rolling pin a good coat of step 1 of Pentart's Fine Line Crackle. When you use this, you want to work quickly. You want to give it a good coat, but you don't want to go back and keep working over it because you don't want your paintbrush to drag in the medium. Once the first step has dried completely, you can go in with the second step, which has a slightly amber color and is very, very glossy. But this is the step that will give you the crackle. Fine line crackle is solvent based, so once that second step dries, you need to go over it with something that is not water based. Here I'm using Pentart's antiquing wax. I used a water based top coat on one of the first projects I did with fine line crackle, and it ruined it. So I've learned from experience to never do that again. I used a soft cloth to buff the antiquing wax, And then as a final step, I painted the handles with an off-white color made by Fusion Mineral Paint. I think this is Chateau. And then I used my Van Dyke antiquing paste to age the handles. I think the rolling pin turned out so cute. I love the icy, wintry effect that it has. Something that I miss living in Las Vegas is seeing this during the winter time. Houses covered in snow and that icy blue sky. My last two projects really aren't projects, they're just touch-ups. There are a couple of things that I upcycled in the past, but I thought they needed some touching up before I could use them for my vignette. This first one here is a sugar scoop that I had purchased on Whatnot. It wasn't painted, the wood was kind of light, and I didn't care that much for it when it came. So I put some milk paint on it and sanded that back, and once I got the chippiness, I was much happier with it. But in looking at it, I felt like it didn't look aged enough. So I went in with my Van Dyke aging or antiquing wax and gave it a coat of that. I think it turned out much better than it was. The second item I decided to touch up is this picture that I did in one of my previous videos, actually very recently, I believe. I love this picture. I love the way it turned out, the chippy milk paint on the frame. And I had made this with this vignette collaboration in mind. But again, in looking at it, I thought it needed to be aged just a little bit more, and so that's what I'm doing. I'm very happy with the way this vignette turned out. I absolutely love it. Once upon a time, I lived in a turn-of-the-century house, and I can certainly envision this sitting in the corner of my kitchen, or maybe even my dining room. It just invokes everything that I love. The Victorian era, antiques, vintage items, Christmas. It's just perfect. You'll have to let me know what you think in the comments. I also decided to do just a little video of the entire vignette that I set up, as I pulled in some of the things that I have that I collect, such as my ironstone pitchers, my English marmalade jars, my campfire marshmallow tin, and then of course my beautiful little vintage Santas. I absolutely love them. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you like my vignette. Please feel free to leave comments and let me know what you think. And thank you again so much for joining. And if you haven't done so yet, please consider giving me a thumbs up, and subscribing to my channel. Each week I will show you how I take thrifted items, tossed aside items, or items that have been given to me and turn them into beautiful home decor. If that sounds like something you'd like, please join me, and have a wonderful rest of your week.